There's a moment right after someone disrespects you when everything in your body screams to react, to say something, to defend yourself. That moment is a trap because the person who reacts immediately has already lost. They've shown their hand. They've shown that a few words from someone else can control their entire nervous system, and the other person walks away thinking I own them. I can do that again anytime I want. Silence does something different. Silence doesn't confirm the insult. It doesn't deny it either. It just sits there and it makes the other person's mind start working over time. I think about a woman I knew years ago who ran a small team inside a much bigger company. There was a colleague who'd make these little comments in meetings. Nothing you could report to HR, just enough to undercut her in front of everyone. Everyone expected her to snap back eventually. She never did. She'd just look at him, pause a beat too long, and move on with what she was saying. No comeback, no defense, nothing. Within a few months, people stopped trusting him and started trusting her more, not because she won some argument. She never had one. It was because her silence made him look small and made her look untouchable. He was doing all the work of humiliating himself. She just had to not interrupt him. This is the part people get backwards. They think power means having the perfect comeback ready. It doesn't. Power means the other person cannot predict what will land on you and what won't. The instant you react to every jab, you've handed them a map of your weaknesses. You've told them exactly which buttons work. Silence removes the map. But here's where it gets dangerous, and this is the part nobody tells you. Silence used out of fear is not the same as silence used as strategy. If you're staying quiet because you're scared, because you've frozen, because you don't know what to say, that's not power, that's collapse, and people can smell the difference. Fear silence invites more disrespect. Strategic silence ends it. So how do you tell them apart? Strategic silence has intention behind the eyes. You're not shrinking, you're choosing. You look at the person, you let the comment hang in the air a second longer than is comfortable, and then you continue exactly as you were going to before they interrupted you. You don't rush. You don't fill the gap to relieve your own discomfort. You let them sit in what they just did. This is where most people fail because they can't tolerate the discomfort of that pause. They think silence equals weakness, so they fill it with an explanation, an apology, a joke to lighten the mood. Every time you do that, you're rescuing the other person from the consequences of what they just said. Stop rescuing them. There's a bigger law underneath all of this. The less predictable you are emotionally, the more power you carry into every room. Disrespect is often a test. Someone throws out a small insult specifically to see what you'll do with it. If you flinch, they've learned something. If you escalate, they've learned something else. If you do nothing and simply continue, you've told them nothing, and that unknown becomes its own kind of authority. Now, I want to be clear, because people take this too far in the other direction. This isn't about becoming cold, checked out, pretending nothing ever bothers you. That's not strength, that's just numbness wearing a strength costume. The goal isn't to stop feeling the disrespect. The goal is to stop performing your reaction to it in real time for the benefit of the person who caused it. Feel it. Sit with it later. Decide away from them whether this is a pattern worth addressing directly, whether it's a relationship worth ending, whether it's a one-time slip you can let go. That decision should never be made in the heat of the moment in front of the person who just disrespected you, because in that moment you're not thinking, you're reacting, and reacting is exactly what they were fishing for. And this is the part that actually kills them, if you want to use that word. It's not your comeback. It's the not knowing. It's watching you continue on unaffected on the surface and having absolutely no idea what's happening underneath. That uncertainty is what erodes a person who's used to getting a reaction. They start needing your reaction to feel like they matter. When you stop supplying it, something in them starts to unravel. So the next time it happens, the comment, the tone, the little dig in front of other people, don't reach for words. Reach for the pause. Let it become uncomfortable. Let them be the only one who has to live in that discomfort. That's not passivity. That's the most controlled form of power there is. After the first video, a lot of people ask me the same question. What if silence isn't enough? What if the person keeps coming back? Good question. Because silence is a first move, not the whole game. It's a diagnostic tool as much as a defense. You go quiet, you watch what happens next, and their response tells you exactly what kind of person you're dealing with. Some people, once they realize the jab didn't land, they back off completely. They were testing you, the test failed, and they move on to someone easier. That's the majority of cases. But there's a smaller group who take your silence as an invitation to push harder. They mistake your composure for an opening. This is the group you actually need a second strategy for. I think about a guy I knew who worked under a manager who specialized in these backhanded little digs, comments about his work being cute, asking if he needed help with things he clearly didn't need help with. He tried the quiet approach for months. It worked on most people in that office. It did not work on this manager because this manager wasn't testing him once. He was testing him constantly, almost addicted to seeing if today would be the day he cracked. So he shifted tactics, not to confrontation, not to a blow-up. He started doing something much colder. Every time the manager made one of these comments, he'd let the silence sit exactly as before, but then later, in a completely unrelated context, he'd quietly outperform him on something that mattered, deliver the project early, get the credit from someone above the manager's head, solve a problem the manager himself was stuck on without ever mentioning the earlier comment at all. He never once brought up the disrespect directly. He just made the disrespect look increasingly stupid in hindsight. Within a year, the manager had stopped entirely, not because he was punished, because he'd been made irrelevant. This is the law underneath it. If someone won't stop testing your silence, don't escalate with words, escalate with results. Words invite an argument, and arguments are exactly the terrain where undisciplined, aggressive people often do their best work. Results don't invite anything. They just sit there as a fact that can't be argued with. But there's a harder truth in here, too, and it's the one people resist the most. Sometimes silence and results still aren't enough because the person disrespecting you isn't actually reacting to anything you're doing. They're reacting to something in themselves, insecurity, threat, a need to feel superior to someone. And no amount of composure on your end changes the engine driving them. In those cases, the answer isn't a better strategy, it's an exit. Some relationships, some jobs, some rooms are not worth the years of managing someone else's dysfunction just to prove a point about your own self-control. Recognizing that difference between someone testing you who can be handled and someone whose disrespect is bottomless is its own kind of maturity. Most people never learn to tell those two apart, and they burn years of their life on the wrong one. Now, here's the part that goes even deeper, and it's the reason all of this works in the first place. Disrespect is almost never really about you. It's about the other person's relationship with their own power or lack of it. Someone who is genuinely secure doesn't need to diminish other people to feel large. The insult is a symptom of something missing in them, not a verdict on something missing in you. Once you actually believe that, not just repeat it as a phrase, your silence changes in quality. It stops being a technique you're performing and starts being an honest reflection of the fact that their comment simply isn't a reliable piece of information about who you are. You're not holding back a reaction out of discipline anymore. There's just less to react to. That's the final stage of this. Not silence as a tactic you're gritting your teeth through. Silence because you've actually stopped needing them to see you differently. And ironically, that's the version of silence that unsettles people the most because it's the one they can't decode at all. There's no strategy to defeat, no wall to break through. Just someone who genuinely wasn't waiting for their approval in the first place. That's the version worth building toward, not the performance of not caring, the real thing. There's something nobody tells you about silence, and it's this: silence has a cost. It's not free. Every time you choose not to react, you're paying with something: your pride, your urge to be understood in that exact moment, your need to correct the record right then and there. And if you don't understand that cost, you'll eventually resent your own strategy. This is where a lot of people who try this approach fail. They go quiet, they hold it together in the room, and then they go home and it eats them alive. They replay it 40 times. They write the perfect comeback in the shower 3 days later. They tell their friends, their partner, anyone who listened, just to release the pressure that built up from not saying anything in the moment.
Yeah.
If that's happening to you, you haven't actually mastered silence. You've just delayed the explosion. I think about a man I once knew who ran a small business, and he had a business partner who constantly took credit for his ideas in front of investors. He'd trained himself to stay perfectly silent in every meeting. Never flinched, never corrected the record, never looked bothered. Everyone around him thought he had incredible composure. But behind closed doors, he was a different person entirely. He drank more than he should have. He was short with his own family. He couldn't sleep some nights, replaying every meeting where credit was stolen from him in real time. His silence in public was real, but it wasn't mastery, it was suppression. And suppression always finds an exit somewhere. This is the law underneath this part of the conversation. Silence only works as power when it's paired with genuine internal processing, not internal storage. If you're just shoving the reaction down without ever actually dealing with it, you haven't built strength. You've built a container that's going to leak eventually, usually onto people who had nothing to do with the original disrespect. So, what does real processing look like versus fake suppression? Real processing means you actually sit with the feeling later privately and you let yourself feel angry or humiliated or small for as long as that takes. You don't perform composure to yourself. You allow the full reaction, just not in front of the person who caused it. Then, once it's moved through you, you decide with a clear head what, if anything, needs to happen next. Fake suppression means you never let yourself feel it at all. You skip straight to acting fine, both publicly and privately, and you assume that means you've transcended the situation. You haven't, you've just filed it away somewhere. It will eventually resurface, usually at the worst possible time, often with someone who doesn't deserve it. The businessman I mentioned eventually cracked, not at his partner, but at an employee who'd made an honest, small mistake. He completely lost it over something minor, and everyone in the office was stunned because they'd never seen him react like that to anything. That explosion wasn't really about the employee. It was 2 years of unprocessed humiliation finally finding a door. This is why I want to be precise about what I'm actually recommending, because it's easy to hear stay silent and turn that into become a person who never processes anything. That's not strength. That's a delayed fuse bomb wearing a calm face. The people who use silence well, the ones who actually get stronger from it instead of hollowed out by it, have some private outlet where the real reaction happens. Maybe it's a conversation with someone they trust completely away from the situation. Maybe it's writing it out brutally honestly where no one else will read it. Maybe it's simply giving themselves permission to feel furious for 20 minutes in the car before they walk back into their life. Whatever the outlet is, it has to exist somewhere, or the silence you're performing in public is going to cost you far more than the disrespect ever did. Silence in front of them, full honesty with yourself. That combination is what actually builds the kind of power we've been talking about. One without the other collapses eventually. There's a final layer to all of this, and it's the one that changes everything once you actually see it. Up until now, we've talked about silence as something you do to someone, a response to their disrespect, a strategy aimed outward. But the most powerful version of this has almost nothing to do with them at all. Let me explain what I mean. Early on, when you first start practicing this, your silence is still fundamentally about the other person. You're staying quiet to deny them a reaction, to unsettle them, to make them wonder what you're thinking. That's a perfectly good starting point, and it works. But notice something, it still centers them. Your behavior is still organized around what they'll think, what they'll feel, how they'll interpret your silence. You've changed the tactic, but you haven't changed the orientation. They're still at the center of your attention, just from a different angle. The deeper version of this, the one that actually changes your life instead of just changing a single interaction, is when their disrespect stops requiring a response at all, not because you're suppressing one, but because it genuinely doesn't reach the part of you that used to need defending. I think about an older woman I once spoke with, someone who'd spent decades in an industry that hadn't been kind to her, full of people who underestimated her, talked over her, took credit that was hers early in her career. She told me she used every version of the strategies we've discussed: strategic silence, letting her results speak, choosing her battles carefully. All of it worked in the sense that it protected her and it built her reputation. But she said something that stuck with me. She said for years, even when she was silent, she was still keeping score. Then, somewhere in her 50s, something shifted. It wasn't a decision, it wasn't a technique she adopted. She said she simply stopped needing the people who disrespected her to eventually recognize what she was worth, not because she gave up, because her sense of her own worth had finally moved somewhere those people couldn't touch it. When someone was dismissive toward her after that, she noticed it the way you notice weather, and then it passed through her without residue. That's the actual destination underneath everything we've talked about across these four parts. Here's the honest truth, though, and I don't want to oversell this. Most people, including me, spend most of their lives somewhere in the middle. You won't wake up one day completely unbothered by disrespect. And if someone tells you that's achievable quickly, they're selling you something. What's realistic is that each time you practice this, the silence, the private processing, the refusal to perform your reaction for someone's benefit, you move the needle slightly. The sting gets slightly shorter. The need for them to see your value gets slightly smaller. You're not aiming for total invulnerability. You're aiming for the version of yourself that needs less and less from the people trying to diminish them. And this is the real reason their disrespect starts to look different once you're further along this path. It's not that your silence is destroying them, exactly, though it might feel that way from the outside. It's that you've quietly exited a game they're still playing. They're still operating as if your reaction is a resource they can extract. You've simply stopped supplying it, not as a punishment, but because you've moved somewhere that game doesn't reach anymore. That's the difference between using silence as a weapon and silence as a location you actually live in. The weapon works, but the location is where you actually want to end up.